Hello, everybody. Summer 2018. I know, and this is the first recording I'm doing, and we're almost in June already. But it takes a little while as we're working on SharePoint to kind of get geared up, get everybody's server connections working correctly, get familiar with the environments, do all our upgrades, learn about virtualization. And right now, basically, we're going to be going into Unit 3. At this point in time, if you click into Unit 3, I really don't have any content in there. And part of that is because I'm completely redesigning this course from the ground up. And I have a new book that I'm using, which is the Microsoft SharePoint Step-by-Step 2016 book. And I am going to pull up an electronic version on my screen, but I'm not going to do it within my host OS where I am right now. I'm actually going to do it with my remote server connection. Now, I already have that connection up and running here, and you can see that when I connect to it, I just want to make sure I'm connected to the right one. This is it right here. That I'm going to switch to full screen mode. So I have this assumption in the background that my recorder is still working. Actually, I have a second screen, so I can see my box here on the second screen, which my students can't see, that my recording is indeed running. I am within the SharePoint environment right now, so I logged in using my Microsoft Remote Desktop to the server IP address that has been assigned. So I assigned myself one just like I assigned all the students one. There's 2 students assigned per virtual machine. You all have your own student account. You know that they're all admin accounts on the machine, so you have complete control over it. And I think a lot of those basics have been covered pretty well at this point. But it's just to reiterate for those of us listening on video. Now that I am actually within the SharePoint environment, which is running Windows Server version 2016, we've been trying to keep up on the updates. In fact, I do have updates running here in the background. So these are the updates that I'm working on today. And I do ask that as students, if you help me keep up on these updates, it really helps both to improve the experience for you and for me. And this is actually one of those things that admins do all the time. You know, not very exciting, but it needs to be done. Why do you even bother to do updates? Because sometimes things are broken, frankly. They find problems. Or there's security holes. Or like you see here, I have pieces of software that need to be updated. And usually those updates will be either security or virus related or stability related. So it really behooves you to keep on top of that stuff. So I do have that running in the background. If it does ask me to reboot, I'm not going to be doing it at this point in time. The other thing that we talked about real briefly is if you are in the situation where you're going to reboot the machine and you're doing updates, to make sure that you go into your task manager. Now, I don't know if you guys caught how I did that. I went to my taskbar down here, right-click, and found Task Manager. That's one of about a half dozen ways to get into that tool. But the typical view for Task Manager is the simplified view, where it just shows you your open applications that you launched. So like whatever windows you have open, basically. But as a power user, and really as a server admin in this situation, you should be clicking on that more detailed view so you can really see the stuff that's running, the resources that are taken up, and the impact on the server. But if you're working with others on the same machine and everybody is assigned to a server mate, basically, before you go in there and do a restart, you want to make sure that people aren't logged in. And you can see one of these students is me, so I'm going to click on that, and you can see I can disconnect myself right from here if I wanted. I can also expand my list here and see all the stuff that I have open. You can see all the different, like Google Chrome, windows that are open. And then, in addition, you can see what your server mate's doing. And if you are going to do a restart, I always want you to be cautious here, because if the person is actively using the machine, right, how would I know if they're actively using the machine? Right, and it's Stephanie, you're right, this is you. And go ahead and start clicking around and go on a website or something. And you can see how the numbers are changing as she's doing stuff on screen. That's what you're looking for. If everything is sitting at 0%, for a long period of time, that person's not on the machine, right? So in that case, you probably would be safe either disconnecting them or signing them out. But if you're rebooting, it really should be a sign out, because that shuts down all your applications and elegantly and politely signs you out of the environment. If you see that people have tools open that might have open documents open or work in progress, and I mentioned this before the video started, but those would include things like Visual Studio or Microsoft Office or SharePoint Designer or hell, Notepad++ for that matter, there's a chance that that person might lose their work. Some of those applications are pretty good at recovering lost work, and some of them are not. So in that situation, don't do a reboot until you've contacted your server mate, usually by email if you want to share phone numbers or text, whatever. That's on you. But I would be cautious in that situation. So don't get like update happy and blow people off when they shouldn't be. All right, so that's just kind of helpful to know. All right, now that we're in the environment, the way that we have these environments set up, the way to connect to your SharePoint server is as follows. You want to just type http://, and then you're going to type sp-dev. Right? Is that the correct address? Yes, it is. All right. Notice there's no like .com or anything like that. This is all an addressing structure that's handled internally in the server. So in other words, if you're connecting to this machine using that URL, it only works from the server itself.
Sorry, this should be
sp-dev. Right. You can see it up in the URL there, in case you forget it. Now this is the first attachment to the server after a reboot, after doing updates, and some changes were made to the server as well. So it is a little bit sluggish, but once it's up and running, it should be pretty responsive. How fast is your connection? Is your connection? You guys are already in? Okay. So once this succeeds, we should get a login screen. And I'm looking at Stephanie right now. So Stephanie and I should get login screens, at which point we'll log in, and then we'll land on our kind of like our home team site. Once we get to that point, that's when we can pull out the book and start to do some work. Now, while this is taking its sweet time, it is taking a long time, it is a little sluggish. I'm actually working on a machine that's probably slower than the machines that you guys are working on. So this is not a great example. But in the meantime, I know I'm going to be referring to my the PDF copy I have of our textbook. And the textbook that we're going to be using tonight is the Microsoft step-by-step book. So I'm actually going to go ahead and log into my Gmail or my school account and then grab that PDF as soon as I find my mouse here. So. I do want you to remember, if you do log into anything personal within this environment, my strong recommendation is you do not save passwords, right? Obviously, why? Because we all know each other's passwords, because we all have the same password. Does that mean you couldn't change your password? Actually, if you can figure out how to change your password, you have my blessing to go ahead and change it. But you have to also understand that every other user on the machine is also an admin, so they can go in there and change it back. And they can get into all your stuff. So you don't want to put personal stuff on here, okay? None at all. And I would recommend not storing passwords unless you really like doing that. And actually, I'm a person who does. So, in fact, I'm a big fan of signing into my browser so that I can go to any device, sign into the browser, and all my passwords and everything just pull in. Yeah, obviously, not a good practice here. So am I going to say never at this point? No, I'm actually not going to say never. I'm just going to click the X. because I don't want to save the password. So now I'm into my account, and what I'm really looking to access here is my Google Drive, where I have my PDF stored. So I'm going to pull up the PDF, and I'm noticing the SharePoint server is not launching. All right. First thing I'm going to do is not panic. Right. I have a suspicion as to why it's not launching, and sometimes it has to do with some of the other dependencies. I'm going to come back to that. Does anybody have a guess? Remember what I did last time? Because I think the same thing happened last week. No, it has to do with the database underneath. Probably not started up. Yeah, so I'm going to check that issue. But first, let's get the book up on the screen. So I'm going to go find my books. I'm going to find my SharePoint Core folder here. Not the review. There it is. All right, so now I have my book open. Not a huge fan of using a browser as a PDF reader, but there we go. That's what I'm using. Now let's go back to this issue where my connection to the server is not loading up, right? We're running on top of Windows Server, and the environments I've configured for you are running Windows Server 2016. We also installed SharePoint Server 2016 and SQL Server. I'm not sure what version that is, 2012 on that one? Okay. Regardless. But SharePoint will not run if it cannot connect to the database. So my first suspicion here is that the database is not started or maybe had an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my task manager, and I'm actually going to look at services to see if my SQL Server is actually running. So now I see already some SQL browsers, distributed, SQL Writer, agent, and okay, this one's stopped. But that's not actually SQL Server. I actually need to alphabetically scroll, and I am sorted in reverse alphabetical. Yeah. Notice it is stopped. So what I'm going to do here, without this component running, SharePoint will not run, right? Because it is a database-based product. So I'm actually going to right-click here and start. So if this happens to you on your VM, it should not. But if it does, keep that in mind.
Do I need to do that too then on my side?
No. Stephanie, since we're on the same server, I'm going to do it and record it. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start. And then you can see here in the status column, now it says it's running. Now keep an eye on the tab in the background that the database is running. Maybe this will actually complete its task, we'll see. If it doesn't, I'm going to come back and do a refresh. Now I'm trying to have also the understanding here that the SQL Server in the background it's a pretty big, robust product. It's not like running Notepad. So it probably, even though it says it's running, it might take a little bit to load up. So let's give that a moment. In fact, my inclination here is while this is still spinning, which means it's hypothetically polling for a response, I'm having my doubts. I'm going to click Stop. Let's count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'd like to see how...
Can I restart mine?
Close. No. Because we're on the same machine, Stephanie.
Oh, okay.
That's the why. All right. So here I go. I'm going to try to hit server again using this machine name. So http://sp-dev. Now, one thing you guys are going to discover is regardless of what machine you work on, all of them have unique machine names. This is one that I picked just because that's what I picked when I built the machine. It could be called whatever, and so on. All right, so there we go. Now I have a prompt. That's how it should respond, right? Nice and snappy. Log in with the same student account that you're using to log into the server. You do not need the fully qualified machine name. By fully qualified machine name, I mean this, which is what you use when you connect to the virtual machine itself. That's not what we want. We just want student, whatever I assign to you, and then your password, which we all know what the magical password is in this class, right? Of course, I'm not going to say it on the video because then people out on the internet know too. I should make them pay extra for it. And then now I'm noticing that it is doing something in the background, so I'm being as patient as I can be. And Stephanie, you're working on the same thing right now, so. Brian and Sabrina, how are your machines responding? You're already in? You have your team site up in front of you? Okay.
I'm not gonna log in and I'm not gonna press like sign in until you're already in, because otherwise it could like go slower.
You know what? That's a smart call. It is. Oh, this site hasn't been shared with me? Has it been shared? Have you been able to get in?
I didn't do it yet.
All right. So now we have another problem. You know what? I love running into problems, right?
This is what they had too. Last
You guys had this issue last week.
And one of them had to go and make it.
Okay. Do you remember what the fix was? We had to go in as an administrator and then share the site with these student accounts. So what I did is when I created these, I had certain user accounts I created. I think I created a dozen user accounts on each machine called student whatever. But I only shared it with the students that needed to have access. We're all going in as complete admins on these systems, but you can see it's an authenticated site. We can't see a darn thing until we fix that issue. Now, the one inclination that you might have is like, great, I'll close all my windows, I'll sign out of my connection, I'll re-sign in as admin, and in fact, that's what I did last week, which was foolish because I don't need to do that at all. In fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to leave this tab open, and then I'm going to look for a piece of software loaded on the server called SharePoint Central Administration. Okay, so I'm going to pull that tool up, and what that's going to do is it's going to bring up a separate browser window here, not the blue screen of death.
I thought the purple one was the worst.
The purple screen of death? I guess I've never heard of that one. The PSOD instead of the BSOD. Now, the one thing that you'll notice here, and we're not really exploring this tool yet fully, okay, is the inclusion to our machine name of a port address. And the reason that we do this, and this is, granted, this is reiterating from last week, but the reason that we do this is we don't want people attaching to the server to know how to get to the administrative control panel. So basically you go to the same machine name, but you go to a custom port address. Now I put in one that was easy for me to remember, 12345, right? But you would pick something that for you is meaningful, and I'll let you choose what that is. So I'm going to actually sign in as administrator now, and I'm making the mistake of trying to read the big screen up there where I can't read that small text. So I'm signing into the SharePoint control panel, or central administration, which is a software tool that runs through a browser that allows us to control the features of SharePoint. Despite the fact that the interface that you'll see when it pops up, and yes, it is being a little sluggish, looks simplistic, the detail of stuff that you can do within that interface is actually kind of mind-boggling. For all the years that I've been tinkering with SharePoint, I'm going to say I'm still scratching the surface on it. But I know enough to be dangerous and how to make certain things work or not work. So here we are watching paint dry. All right, now you can see that it finally has popped up. I'm not going to save the password for admin. It's kind of my thing. And for right now, I do want you kind of to ignore this box that says there are some critical issues. Okay, whatever. I'm sure there are, but things that we will take care of at a later time. Our topic right now isn't administering SharePoint. Our topic right now is getting in there and being able to even just use it on a rudimentary level. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to it's not in the spot where you would think, right? Remember, Brian, when we were looking at this last week, what was your intuition? You went right to the security area, and that didn't do it. Right? Really what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with an application. SharePoint is an application. So I'm actually going to click on Application Management. I could go directly to Manage Web Applications, but I just want to kind of show you the layers of the menus. depending on the type of user that you are, clearly the administrator is an admin here, you will have a different level of detail that appears. So if you're a full admin like you guys all are, you should get every option that's installed available to you to tweak. All right. So now we're going to go into Manage Web Applications. All right. And then you can see the two applications we have running on our server are the regular SharePoint site, which is on port 80. That's the default web port. You guys should know that. If you don't know that, okay, now you do. But that's the default port address for network connections that deliver web content. And then here's my custom port and machine name for being able to connect to the central administration. The one that we want to change is the SharePoint server. Now, even though this appears as a link, when I click on it, it doesn't take me anywhere, but it does. Notice how it enabled the whole ribbon bar here? Yep. And then I forget, where did we go, Brian? Was it permissions or was it user policy? Yeah, I forget too. So much of an expert as I am, right? Yeah. Well, actually, I think that is actually the spot where we want to go. Okay, so that was the control panel that we want to go to. Yeah. Now, what this screen actually shows us is that SharePoint out of the box comes with 4 pre-configured permission sets, right? One is full control, read, write, edit, create, destroy, everything you can possibly do. Another one where you can read everything that's on the site, you just can't create any of it, right? And then look at these other ones, deny write, right? So I can like forcibly lock people out of certain things, and deny all, which is the default for people that aren't authenticated. That's why I couldn't get in. Right? Now, what's interesting about this is you can actually delete these and create new ones that are custom. Yes. Now, for the most part, I don't see much of a reason to do that unless you're trying to lock people out of specific areas while giving them power in others. So that's something you will tread on very lightly. But we're going to go back to the user policy here, and you can see right now all the different users that are allowed. And look at the permissions they have. Full read. Nobody has full control over it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this Add Users link here, and I'm going to begin by selecting a zone. Now, what's a zone? Well, a zone is, as it says there, related to the authentication authority for the machine that you're on. So typically, the user accounts that are enabled for SharePoint are typically tied to the Windows authentication system, so the user accounts that are built into Windows.
Like
So,
ours would be like certain times to log in.
yep, and so because you use that same thing to log into Windows, so that's correct. Now, it is important to note that you can actually separate your logins from the underlying system, so you can have SharePoint handle its own logins independent of the Windows operating system. That is not what we're doing here, folks. Okay, because that's actually more atypical, because if you're in an organization and you log into Windows, they have usually one machine on the network that authenticates all the logins. And then once you're logged in, that's like replicated out to all the different servers and your permissions follow. So we're just going to actually just leave it as it is, and we're going to click Next. And now we have this window here, and this is one of these quirky SharePoint windows, where I can actually, if I want to find what users I want to give permissions to, I can actually go to a list, right? So there's this browse thing, and then this will take a moment, but it'll go into our Active Directory or whatever other servers we're using for authentication, and then pull those users into the system. Now, I don't know if I have to do an add here.
Start typing.
Yeah, and that's generally the rule of thumb. But I can do that typing right here. So for example, I know that I have like student, oh, I don't remember which one, right? So I'm just going to type student. And then it should pull up a dialog here. Oh, no exact match was found. Okay.
Oh, just stopped it. There's no number.
Yeah, I didn't put a number in. So here, let me put, I think I may have put in a space at the end of it. But I'm student 10, so let's add that one in. Is right. Yeah, it, where, you know, it,
Did you do the check?
no, I didn't. You know, it should be automatic. Right. That kind of blows the example, right, when it doesn't work. Let's try your account. Okay, that one I found right away. Let me try student 10. Okay. I think I'm going to be safe, and I'm going to add the administrator in there, too. That's probably not a bad one to have in there. And then I found the administrator. Notice with the administrator, I put in the fully qualified administrator with machine. Right. All right. So anybody else that you want to throw in here to have permission to access the site, you can. Might not be a bad idea to give permission to all the users on the server. But you know what? Then they miss out on this experience. All right. So whatever that's worth. All right. Now, for all these people, they're all going to be admins. I'm going to give them full control. All right. I'm not going to worry about the account operates the system. We talked about this briefly last week, but it does say system accounts will not be recorded in the user information list unless the account is directly added to the permissions of the site. Any changes made by a system account will be recorded as made by the system. You know, basically that's a whatever. Okay. Not much to concern yourself with. With these SharePoint dialog boxes, which look kind of weirdly generic like this, and they're really all web interfaces, you always want to be sure that you scroll, because sometimes there's a whole lot more stuff, and it's easy to overlook it, just fair warning, right? The one thing that you overlook here is the fact that the finish button is out of view on my screen, so if I don't scroll, I'm not seeing that. So I'm going to go ahead and click finish. All right, now you can look at the list here and how we do have some people that do have full control. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then I also want to point out here that there's a separate one for anonymous policy. Who the hell is anonymous?
Anyone else given the URL.
Right. So anybody else that's out on the internet. So if somebody has this IP address and knows how to get their traffic to this machine, do we allow the public to see the site? The question, or the answer to that question is maybe, maybe not. That's really to be determined. For a lot of organizations, the answer is very simply no. Right? It's only authenticated users. For some organizations, they actually use SharePoint to drive front-end websites and content management systems. So in that case, you would set a policy that would be according to that. Yeah.
To be honest.
Now, I'm going to take my central admin tab and I'm going to pull it off and I'm going to minimize it and get it out of the way. And then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to see if I can backtrack here. I'm hitting the back button. That's probably not the smart move. And I'm just going to retype the server address. I should get prompted for the login. Now, if it tells me that I'm just denied automatically, it's retaining my attempted login. And that means I really have to close the browser and restart the browser. So I'm hoping that's not the case. Because I really would prefer not to, right, for obvious reasons. All right. Right now, what I'm seeing looks good. All right. Remember, this is kind of like first launch. Be patient. The thing with SharePoint Server and SQL Server, the technologies that are running underneath, they have like these intelligent, like, I'm going to sleep mode right now. And of course, this comes up right when I'm saying that. Can't install updates, and the reason is it wants me to reboot or something needs to be shut down. Yeah, I'm not doing anything right now, okay? That's just, you don't do that when people are connected to the machine. That's why people do server upgrades when? At like 3 a.m., right? And that's why you don't want to be a server manager as a profession. I'm just, been there, done that, no thank you. Not anymore. All right, so if you're successful, folks, hopefully you get to, yay, a basic team site that looks something like this. All right, now we're at the point in class right now, we're halfway through, so I am going to pause the video for right now, and we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come right back. All right, we're back from our break. I don't know if that was quite 5 minutes, but close enough. And now we're going to try to do a little bit of work from our book, believe it or not. Yay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the book up on screen here. And let me check to see, do we have the Adobe PDF Reader installed here? I'm such a non-fan of browser-based PDF readers. I'm going to actually pause the video for a second and download the Adobe Reader if you guys don't mind. All right, I was just reminded of how much of a pain it is on Windows Server to install things using Internet Explorer. So I'm going back to the browser to pull up the PDF. And the only reason I'm a little reluctant to do this, frankly, is because of the kind of the hassle of being able to scroll through pages and stuff. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to use the browser-based PDF reader, and then if you guys are running into the same issues, yes, you can install software on the machine, but that Internet Explorer's got like all these filters built in that, security measures basically makes the browser practically unusable until you kind of overcome it.
Oh, it's fine. I've just downloaded it from my computer and transferred the file over. It's fine.
The installer, you downloaded the installer to your computer or the PDF? Okay. Well, maybe somebody already installed it for you. But see, I'm trying to get away from doing the PDF. See, but that's in the browser. I don't want to do it in the browser.
Okay.
I want to use an actual PDF reader because they have.
All those tools on
Yeah, and see what just happened there. There we go. So I'm trying to avoid some of the cumbersome stuff here. All right, so folks, I'm going to be jumping into chapter 1 in the book. I have an ebook version that I'm working from, and so you can see like one of the reasons by working with the browser-based version is it's kind of slow. But what I do want to do is I do want to kind of go through some of these sections here of the book, because to me it's pretty important that you guys are kind of up to speed on some of the basics here. So they always have, typically in a textbook, they'll have an introduction section. I know a lot of students tend to have this mindset of like, I'm skipping that and I'm just going to whatever the teacher tells me to read. Big mistake, especially for a technology book. Why? Because especially with the technology book, there's sometimes pieces in here that you might miss otherwise that are really kind of critical to the things that you're doing. All right, so they actually go through and they talk about how the book was put together, what the different chapters cover, and then also that there are actually practice files for the book. So if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to go ahead and click that link. So it'll open up in a separate tab here, and you can go to the publisher's website and download those files. One thing I do want to tell you, though, is that if you go to our course shell, and I'm going to actually have to kind of backdoor into this here, and I'm being silly here. I'm actually going to drop down to my host OS and go right to the resources page of our course shell. And I have those same links listed right here. So all the downloads, the errata, which you should check as you're working on things, especially if you run into problems. And then in addition, the practice files and the glossary, which are zippable. So some of the chapters, first chapters excluded, will have files that will help you with the projects that you're working on. And those can be found in that zip, or you can go to the publisher's website to get that. So you don't have to actually do the rigmarole of doing that. So I don't really need to go here. All right, so that I think is pretty important to know. Now, the thing that we will run into as we're working is, depending on the kind of installation that you have, you will have certain features available and certain features not. And that's kind of a problem when you're going through a book that wants to take you step by step and then stuff's not working. So notice that, you get to certain chapters and there's going to be some settings that will need to happen, and they'll talk about those in the chapters. And then where necessary, we'll go into the servers and make the adjustments ourselves. If you're working on a server that's other than the ones that I'm providing for you, like for example, if you're using the Gateway Office 365 SharePoint server access, some of these things might be available and some not. I haven't tested the stuff there, but that is my intent over time, is to do that. And then here he's got a complete list of all the practice files that are needed. You can see they vary a lot in format and type. All right. Now, the other thing that we're going to figure out here too, and this is actually part of Chapter 1, are SharePoint is a server product, and there's different versions, right? There's what is happening out in the workplace now, which is everybody's moving to hosted solutions. And then we have different levels of on-premise solutions, including standard and enterprise. And then you have this thing called a CAL, which this is Microsoft speak now, which stands for Client Access License. So on some SharePoint servers, or if you do online subscriptions, there's limitations to how many people can connect simultaneously. On the virtual machines that we're working on Gateway SharePoint server here at school, you guys already know that the Windows machines allow for 2 concurrent logins. That's not the same for the SharePoint site. You can actually have many concurrent logins on those. Right. And fortunately, yeah, those subscription plans are not something that we're worried about at this point. All right. But we will talk about some of these issues as we move along. How far we actually get in this book will kind of depend. Frankly, I hope to try to get through the whole book. That's my goal. I know that that's a lofty goal. So we'll get as far as we can, and then please keep in mind that there's also SharePoint Advanced, where we will be doing additional things. And both classes share the same books. So, all right. Some links and stuff that you might want to look at, but now we're actually getting into the meat of the material here. And I guess I should probably be polite and go make this a little bit larger for those of you watching at home. All right. They start to finally introduce SharePoint. And I know that here in class we've already had discussions about it, and I don't mean to belittle those discussions, but SharePoint is really, in my mind, not necessarily just a piece of software. It's a platform. It's a server platform that does so many different things that it's really kind of hard to put a distinct definition upon it. And that's really one of its greatest features, really, is the fact that it allows you to work in so many different ways. All right. Now, if you were working and maybe like reading a book like this, and you were working in a corporate environment where you had very limited access to the machine and absolutely no admin access, you might work through a book like this and do some of the tutorials and then get to a point where you can't do something and you have no power to change something. So you might have to put in a support ticket and then ask your admin will just say, nope, and you're done, right? So you can't even try certain features. One of the reasons we give you guys admin access to the machines that we've built is so that you can really very politely shoot yourself in the foot, because there's a lot to be learned in an environment like that. So now what we're going to use SharePoint for is really to kind of learn what it does initially. Before we can do more powerful things, you have to get it before you can code for it, right? And that's actually one of the changes that we're making in our SharePoint classes. Is our initial iterations of this was all code focused to develop for the environment without really thinking about how the environment works. And because Microsoft's pushing it all onto the cloud now, our mindset here is we need to teach how it works first, and Microsoft really has made it much more difficult to code directly for the environment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't make it any less limited. It just makes it maybe a little less, customizable is maybe the way to look at it. You're going to hear some terminology thrown around. The one thing that I'm seeing here is that, they're talking about on-premise and off-premise, or what a lot of people will say, on-premise and hosted for off-premise or in the cloud somewhere. And really the push for Microsoft, once again, is they really, with versions 2016, and I think as they're coming out with 2019 or whatever it is, they really want you to go online with this. They want it hosted. They want it in the cloud. They want it on Azure. They really don't want you messing with it, basically. It's kind of the mindset.
For companies too, because everything is like already upgraded on that side automatically, like every day. You don't have to worry about upgrading your site. It's all automatically done.
Right. And then what happens if all the updates are automatic and they're handling all that for you? You just focus on your business as opposed to running the equipment and running the software. All right. If you're curious, okay. If you're curious, you can also look into some of the things that they offer on Azure. I'm hoping that this reloads here. Okay. If it's not one thing, it's another. You guys catching this? Yeah, do you want to just read right from the book? Maybe I should break out my dock cam and I'll just use my phone. I do have one fail-safe though. You guys, I can drop back down to my host OS and I got the book right here. So let's go back to the book. All right, let's do it here instead. So there's always a backup mechanism with all this virtualized stuff. All right, so where were we? We were right here. All right, so with a lot of organizations, and Gateway is one of them, right? We do offer to our students free Microsoft Office, right? And that comes in the form of both being able to download it and install it like a regular software package, or what really your mindset change should be now is like we do all our Google apps where we have Google Docs and Google Sheets and all that, is to do all the Microsoft stuff directly online in your browser. In fact, why don't I just go ahead, I'll just go to office.com. It's going to try to authenticate me. I should automatically be signed in. And you see I drop into, it even kind of looks like a SharePoint screen right off the bat, right? Because that's the Microsoft style. And then you will see that SharePoint is bundled in, right? And I can use all my Office apps directly from this environment. Now, the one thing that we will experiment with, and I'm not going to do it tonight, but in future weeks, is we are going to play with the tools here in Office 365 so that we have some familiarity with it. And it will also, depending on what permissions were given, and I say that pensively, because who knows, right, with our server admins here, we might be able to do some of our collaborative efforts out in this environment without having to configure a darn thing and worry about permissions. So we'll see how that goes. Where it'll be probably most effective is the fact that because it's Office 365 and because it's SharePoint and because Teams are bundled in and a few other tools, it should be a little bit more seamless going from your OneDrive to a Word document to a list to a workflow to a, and if all these terms are kind of weird to you now, you'll see what I mean when we get there, right? Because they're already kind of bundled together and operational. If you're curious, you can click on the SharePoint button there and go into Gateway's implementation through Office 365. All right, so that's one way you can experiment with things. And please experiment to your heart's content. You're not going to break anything, okay?
It depends how they have the team set up.
Right.
If they're private or public, otherwise you won't be able to assign any or create any. It depends on the privileges like that.
Yeah, and my knowledge of this setup here at Gateway is people use the Office products, but most people on campus tend to install. Students often will use Office 365 through the browser, and I really don't think very many of them even touch SharePoint. The other thing that you should know, though, that I think is pretty important, is basically the fact that you also have a separate OneDrive that's available through your Gateway account, just like you have a Google Drive. And it works in a lot the same ways, so just be aware. more than anything. Let's go back over to the text now and scroll down. They do make a point here of talking about what they call hybrid environments. So, and what that basically means is a combination between on-premise and hosted or cloud-based solutions working together. When that's set up correctly, it can be pretty slick, but I find that most effective is you go one approach or the other and stick with that in its entirety. All right, so we've already gotten this far, right? We've gotten to the point where we can actually get to what looks like something like this when you log in. And for as simple as that is, just being able to get to a page, it's kind of like when you build your first web page and you go, woohoo, I got a web page. It actually is on the screen and it's actually doing something and working, which is a good thing, right? But we need to go a little further than that, obviously. The menu structure for SharePoint will be initially a little bit confusing, like where you get to things, why certain options appear only when you're in certain areas. That's going to be interesting. So I do want you to look at some of the tools that they're talking about here and how they're putting it together. So notice, there's going to be a side menu, there's going to be top menus, there's going to be often these tiles that they use, which are kind of navigation links in and of themselves. And the way that these will respond to what you're doing are very context sensitive. And that's the thing that's probably initially most disorienting. But once you get a feel, when you're working with certain tools and you do it repetitively, all of a sudden you'll start to see the picture snap into place. The one thing that's kind of interesting, though, is working as an admin with these tools, you'll have a lot more options available to you. And frankly, some of them are dangerous. You can really do some damage to things here, okay? So I haven't had anybody completely destroy a server yet, but I have had people screw them up or, uninstall something or click on the wrong thing, and usually we're able to fix it or figure out a way. If we can't fix it, don't panic. I have backups of the originals here, so I can redeploy a server. It usually takes about 20 minutes to a half hour to redeploy, and then you might have to do some of your upgrades again, but just keep that in mind. All right. Now, notice throughout the book they'll have these little boxes. And it says your screen might not include links to all parts of the site because of the way security permissions in your server have been set up, right? So one thing that you're going to see on like this screen, most notably, you go into SharePoint, you notice that this last box, if you can even read that on your screen, it says keep email in context, right? If you look at my remote server screen and actually bring up the SharePoint window, I don't have that here, do I? Right? Because my SharePoint server is not integrated with an email account. That's one reason. Additionally, that feature might not just be triggered on. So that's another issue. So, okay, so let's go back to the host OS here. Yes, there is a help button. Although I will tell you, when I run into SharePoint problems, I find that the Microsoft Help at times is helpful, okay? But most often, like most of you have learned to find go-to sites. Like the big one is always Stack Overflow when you're doing like really complicated things, especially when you get into nitty-gritty stuff. So choose your sites carefully and always try to keep things in context. If the fix for a problem that you're having seems a little too extravagant, it probably is, right? And if you get to that point, talk to your server mate or contact me, and I'll try to help guide you through it. All right. Now, I think at this point, they want you to actually to experiment a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is what I typically do in my host OS is I'm going to move the book off to my second screen, which is going to be almost impossible for me to read because it's about a mile away. But hopefully, that's not too bad. And then on my main screen here, which you guys are seeing in the video, I'm going to switch back to my virtualized environment. Um, so this is my on-premise VM running inside of a server, down that, dream within a dream inception rabbit hole that we talked about. But now I'm actually in that server environment, and I want you actually to experiment with some of the links. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the help link and see what it brings up. So that the book is talking about that. And are you guys noticing where it's pulling this up from? See, it says waiting for. Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah. Are you doing anything wrong? No. If we look at the technical details, I can tell you that basically you're not going to find help here because we have limited disk space, right? So, yeah, right. So that's why I was recommending Stack Overflow so hard. Um, Now, jumping back to my host OS, I can click on the link here, and then notice that it kind of brings up something that's similar, but where does it take you? Takes you to, yeah, it takes you to the Office website where you can start to get help on specific, yeah, and they do, and I will say for Microsoft, I got to give them some kudos that they have done this stuff. It has really improved significantly. All right, so keep that in mind. And yeah, and notice, and Stephanie, you're pointing out the right thing. She's got her finger on the screen here, pointing this out. Um, and if you're not picking up on this yet, this is what they want. They want you to move online. They don't want it to be loaded on your own servers. So it's kind of like the equivalent of if you're doing Gmail and all the Google apps that you loaded on your own servers. Nobody even thinks that way because they didn't start that way, right? It's all through the browser. Microsoft is catching on to that. And moving back basically is a good way to look at it. So let's go back to the server now, and right now I'm in our book, and I'm trying to figure out the page number, but I'm not figuring it out. So all right, so I got to know the page number here. It always drives me crazy when I don't. No page numbers. Okay, I'm on the page. We're at the top. It says to open a SharePoint site, step 1. Okay. Now we've already done this, right? So let me just show you what it looks like in the book. Okay. And if you have a printed copy of the book, it's yeah. And actually now I just answered my own question because this is a dump from the ebook, so it doesn't have page numbers because it can change. All right. But this is where we're at. So it says to open a SharePoint site. And it says, in your browser, open your server URL. Now, you guys were given a server URL, and in our case, it's http://sp-dev, right? We figured that out already. And in the book, they just point out that they're using a different server. But whatever your server is, that's how you get to it. So get to learn what that is. One thing that we were trying a week or so ago is going to localhost on the SharePoint server, which we discovered does not work, right? So don't do that because the application's not set up to handle it. Although you could set up routing and stuff in the server settings to allow for it to happen. That's a separate issue. Really shouldn't be done that way. When you do come to the SharePoint site, you will be prompted to log in if it asks, right? If you're doing the hosted version or the Office 365 version, obviously I did have to sign into Office. I leave myself signed in, so I didn't get a login screen, but you guys know how to do that, I assume, as well. All right. Depending on what version of SharePoint you're using, you will get different looking dialog boxes. We're working through a browser directly on the server, so we get this generic looking white box with username and password, and you can sign in. If you are working locally on a Windows machine, you might get prompted for a Windows level login. If you're already logged into the server, you shouldn't get that. You should get the web-based one. Just something to know. All right. The next thing they want us to try is to open SharePoint Help, and we figured out in our hosted environment that's not happening. However, in the Office 365 version, clearly the help takes you where? The Microsoft website. So that's one place you can go to. So you could always bookmark that. All right. One of the big reasons that we use a platform to do work is its ability to allow you to work collaboratively with other individuals. So what does that mean? Well, on a simple level, you guys can put stuff on a web page and I'll look at it, right? But there's social aspects to SharePoint where you can basically make connections with people, send information, comment on things, and more importantly, actually share documents and work on things in real time at the same time on the same things, depending on what you're doing. And I use the word depending kind of loosely there. The book is, I'm pulling that back over here, and of course it moved me to a different spot. But one of the big things that people think of when they think of SharePoint, especially those that are early adopters, was that, oh, that's just where we store our files. That's only one aspect of what it does. Not only can you store your files within the environment, but you can actually take Office documents if the environment's configured correctly and edit them directly within SharePoint. Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And not only that, but it helps keep a version history. It allows multiple edits. You can also kind of block people from changing stuff while you're changing things, obviously for obvious reasons. But that is a pretty important thing. Another thing that you're going to find is that you do use SharePoint for creating websites, right? So it can be intranet sites, it can be public-facing sites, and it works pretty well as a tool like that. And I know a lot of the students, when they get to working on like projects within SharePoint, often will build like a portfolio site or just some sort of simple website, to kind of demonstrate their skills. But notice that there's other tools here that you can use. So we talk about, blogging. Really, it's kind of a sophisticated content management system, and it has a lot of tools that are built in. And some of, or the way I think of it, right, a lot of the work that we do within SharePoint kind of boils down to working with lists, which is kind of strange. But it really kind of stems from this whole concept of working with databases. Or think of how data is in a database. It's all tables of related information, rows and columns of logically similar things. And lists are a big feature of SharePoint. So a lot of the stuff that you do information, if you're creating information, can fit into a list format of some sort. And then that technology is combined with a thing called libraries. And you can see that in upcoming chapters, there's going to be stuff that we're going to be doing in those environments. All right. We did talk about the fact that file storage is what a lot of people think of SharePoint as, and really there is the OneDrive tool that most of modern Windows users now are familiar with, because if you have like a Windows 8 or above PC, one of your login options is you log in with a Microsoft account, and then it automatically ties in your OneDrive, which is your online storage. SharePoint also has a OneDrive attached to it, but it's called OneDrive for Business. It's slightly different, but it essentially works the same. It creates a local folder on your machine that replicates to the cloud, but here's the powerful part. You can also tie it into the SharePoint environment on top of it all. So if I drop a file into my OneDrive on my PC, I can then jump up to my SharePoint implementation, the file's there, and I can pull it right onto a SharePoint page and allow others to edit it. I mean, that's pretty powerful stuff. So they do have a chapter on working with that. And let's talk about this little next section here. It says, the documents library. So, given the fact that one of the primary things that people at least think of SharePoint historically as being a file sharing platform, there is some instructions here about going to the documents library. So you're going to see here on the left-hand side of the screen that there's a link to documents. If you want to go back into the environment here and just go ahead and click on that, no harm will come, because basically there's nothing in there right now. But you can see very simply, right, that there's all these different tools here. So I can create a document right here, right? I can upload something, I can make it sync, and then you can share it and a few other things. Now, what's interesting about this, right? So this is like a document library, but you think once I start adding documents, what am I looking at? A list of documents in my document library. So this is where the terms come from. Next topic here is posting to a newsfeed. So now that is very much like the social media constructs that we think of, right? So yes, you can actually create feeds and posts, and then interact with your peers that way. So if you go back into the virtualized environment here and go back to the home page here. Let it do its thing, taking its sweet time. It takes a little bit of getting used to when you're switching between, the virtual environment and the actual environment. Yeah. So if you do want to post to a news feed, you have to go to a SharePoint site that actually has that feature enabled. So now in my virtual environment here, I don't know if I really have too many sites available, and you can see it's working on it. In fact,
mine and yours be the same for the newsfeed?
yeah, since we're on the same server, provided that we both have access to whatever site we're going to and that a posting feature is available, then that will be something that we can do. You can see right now it's working on it, and it's kind of going a little bit slow. Yeah, yeah, it's going slowish is really kind of a good way to look at it. I mean, so slow that it makes me impatient, basically. All right. Well, you can always try that in the hosted environment if you want. No harm done. Meaning the Office 365 environment, but that's just basically what you'll do is you'll get a box like this, and then you just type in and you post it, and it pops up on a feed. People can react to it or make their own posts or comment or like or whatever. Except it's not liking. I forget what Microsoft calls it. All right.
I don't think that we have permissions to do it.
Yeah, that could very well be, because we're really working with kind of like a fresh, kind of a clean slate right now. So a lot of stuff's not going to work. Initially, we couldn't even connect to it, right? So a lot of it's going to kind of come in the aftermath, because we're going to have to figure, as we start getting into some of the exercises, and this is one of the things that they're talking about right here. So once we do have some sites created, team sites or whatever, then you will go in there and start setting permissions so that you can actually do stuff with the site. So it's kind of like a multi-step process. When you're working with like Office 365 environment, all this stuff is kind of pre-configured for you in a standard way, right? So we don't have to worry about that nitty-gritty. But we're fortunate that we have that to compare with, so we're going to leverage that. But once you get to the point where you have a site, and notice that what they call it a role-based user permission level. So depending on the kind of user you are, so you can be a regular user, or an editor, or a designer, and you can see the different permission levels that will be given. Now, because we want to try to like go full throttle with this stuff and try all of it, one thing that we will do is we'll typically just do full control as much as we can. All right. Now, there are going to be some issues, okay? And I want you guys to kind of be prepared for that so you're not like freaking out when we get there, which the students often do, but that's okay. And the whole point of like being able to, let's say, create and manage a site, you might go, okay, I'm going to create a site, and you click on it, and no, it doesn't work. Or Brian, you try to make a document, and I can't do a new document. All right, well, we haven't turned that on. So, and then we might find out that just turning it on might not be enough. You know, we might have to set some permissions, and then we might, you know, and those types of things. Now, those are valuable little skills to learn because not a lot of people learn them. And that's what makes this pretty employable. Even just being exposed to it in many circumstances is enough to, you know, by a lot of people's standards, make you an expert on it, believe it or not. As weird as that is, right? All right. Once you get some sites up and running, you will get the ability to then take that site that you've created and then ask other users on your server to have permission to connect and be able to access the site. Now, we might try to do some of this collaborative like team site stuff, and we might try to do it up in the Office 365 environment just so we get a more full flavor of interacting that way, and that will be kind of a work in progress. Right. So you can see there's chapters, right? And notice this little thing, right? And that's one of the reasons why, you know, we have to learn how to go into that central administration panel when we get there. All right, now let's talk about, you know, the Office 365 elephant in the room, right? Office 365 is basically the online version of Microsoft Office, which you guys already know. But Microsoft still does make the installable version. Office 2016 is probably what most people are using, but I think they're ready, and I don't know if it's going to be 2019 or what they're going to call it next. But I think eventually at some point, Microsoft is just going to say, we're not distributing it as software anymore. And I think they're really close to that. They're just going to say, sorry, it's all online. What is required for that really to happen, though, is ample bandwidth and that enterprise users are not limited in capability, because there is an advantage to having a piece of software directly installed on your hardware, and that is it runs even if the internet's out. You know, if it's on a laptop and the power goes out, you can still, you know, type your documents. If it's all in the cloud and it's hosted and you don't have connectivity and you don't have power, then where are you? You're nowhere, right? So for a lot of businesses, that's a scary proposition. So that's why, you know, Google started completely cloud-based with all their stuff. So we're okay with it, right? Hey, I can't do it on my laptop, I'll do it on my phone, right? But you can do all this stuff on your phone too, that's the irony of it. But there is kind of this integration that is happening, and you can see that if you're comfortable in an office environment, you start looking at all, you know, the virtualized tools on the ribbon bars and everything, you'll see that there's a similarity in the layout of the menus, how things are presented to you. Although granted, some of the level of complexity is significantly different. Okay, significantly different. That's where all my computers are signing in at home all of a sudden. Makes me wonder if we lost power and it's all coming back up. Yeah, because it is storming right now, right?
I haven't heard anything though. Is this like pretty soundproof, this room?
Not that soundproof.
No.
All right. So one of the things that we hope to be able to get to do is to have that integration between Office and SharePoint working together. Another thing that, and this is one of these things that is more of a like a fringe feature, but some enterprises really look for people that can do this, which is the fact that SharePoint does have a lot of business intelligence tools built in that allow you to do a lot of like analytics type of things. So in other words, you can bring in like spreadsheets or take the stuff that you've stored and then run scripts to it and look at data in a completely different way, visualize the data, monitor it in real time. So you can see like what the appeal would be for a business there doing this type of stuff. All right. All right. Notice what this says. For Office SharePoint Server 2016, your organization must have an Office online server installed and activated in your on-premise environment to use Office online apps. So what is this telling you, Brian?
That's why I couldn't.
That's why you couldn't, right. Now, once you upload a document, that's a little different. To get this experience in full, we really are going to have to jump into the Office 365, the hosted version, to do some of this. But we're fortunate that we have that available. The other thing that I plan on experimenting with, and then you guys can go there with me, is because we all have access here at Gateway to this thing called DreamSpark, right, or what they call the Microsoft Imagine program. And for those of you that don't know the URL, this is the URL, gtconthehub.com.
Do I do that on the server or do I do it on my machine?
Doesn't matter.
I have the-
Now, the thing that you should know here is that one thing that you do have access to here is you can download like any Microsoft piece of software that you want, right? And you guys, or just about any piece of software. I got to say that very carefully because you can't get Office through here. That's one thing they don't give you. And I also noticed that they started taking what I would call older deprecated versions and removing them from availability. It used to be that I could get any version of Windows going back into time or Windows Server or whatever, right? And now they're kind of capping those versions. They don't even want you touching them. Not that you can go to the Microsoft archives and find them. You can. All right. But one thing that you will notice is that, and I'm typing Azure for the search here, and this is new. And I haven't played with this, right? But if I'm reading this right, we can, I'm hoping use this for free. But it used to be, last time I did this, it was either like a 60 or 90 day, right? And then it's like you break out the credit card, it's $250 a month, right? Scary, right? Now, I'm going to explore this, and I encourage you guys to explore this too. Because one possibility is if we find our installation limited, and we find our Office 365 Gateway installation limited, is that we could maybe switch ourselves to working on the cloud on Azure in earnest, where they have these deployment mechanisms in place where you do kind of like when you have like hosting and they have like a one button install for WordPress. They have the same kind of thing for SharePoint.
It's just like an app that you like have to
Right. Not to mention that the Azure platform has all these other capabilities. You can deploy WordPress on it. You can make websites. You can run SQL Server. You can run email servers. You can do all sorts of stuff. And just the fact that you even get to play with it. Now, I'm going to explore this and try to figure out what the real limitations are of it. But I encourage you guys to do the same. And where does it say that, Brian? Now you're scaring me. 18 or older and attend an accredited degree-granting 4-year educational institution where you're a full-time student. I think we probably still,
because we have for your program.
yeah. Brian's talking about that. All right, so this is going to take a little exploration on our parts to see exactly what the limitations are.
So, are you saying with Azure you can spin up a SharePoint?
You can spin up anything.
Do they have like built-in where you just deploy it like?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it is pretty, it is very amazing, actually. So we are going to spend a little bit of time exploring this too. So it's going to be one step at a time, folks. So don't.
Because I have my
Oh yeah, you had, okay.
Like this?
Yeah. No, I see. I'm curious with mine.
not like this, but just going to Microsoft.
Now I might find myself in the same situation because I did Azure a while ago and I know it's expired. Um, but for you guys, it might be different. And what I might end up doing is I might try to see if I can get like a fake student account. So whatever. I'll figure out a way. Don't worry. I'm not saying I'm hacking it. I'm just saying. All right. Let's see, other stuff I want to talk about here. There's a bunch of different versions of SharePoint. You guys are seeing all different version 2016, 2013, and then they're paired up with Office versions as well. So some of those are things that you want to think about as you're kind of working. Office 365 you get through the Gateway website.
Oh, yeah, this is for to get, that's probably the best route to get, to be honest, we should
Yeah.
ask them to give you
Yeah.
password, because I tried the other way and it's saying everything's incorrect.
Yeah, you can't, you don't log in. It's a separate login system from the Gateway system. I usually had like,
Yeah, I'll go through the,
yeah. Just look on the Gateway website, and Stephanie's right. If you really run into problems, you can always put in a support ticket, and they can guide you. In fact, it might actually be faster.
I just requested a team for us through the support tickets and stuff.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Then I'll get an email saying one of your students is asking for a team site.
I asked for a public one for SharePoint people and a private one for our class.
Well, I appreciate your go get 'em attitude.
Well, you know, all the
All right.
teachers know.
All right. Now, they are showing here some step-by-step stuff where we are seeing that you can have these capabilities. And I do, like I said, you want to experiment, try it within an environment, you probably will run into problems. But if you're doing it on the Office 365 stuff, this stuff should work without, yeah, it's all there. All right. We're getting kind of to the tail end of the chapter here, but they're showing you all the different versions of SharePoint, and I think it's interesting when you look at the versions that there's been 5 major versions prior to the one that we're working with now. And the fact that they're either have released or are really close to, I think, publicly releasing the next version, and I don't know if it's going to be 2019 or 2020, I forget, that this is a product now that has come a long way. But its initial deployment around the early 2000s, it was, I'm not going to say it was revolutionary because really there were other products that kind of came like a decade before that were already thinking about all this stuff, like Lotus Notes and GroupWise and products like that. But SharePoint really, because of Microsoft's position, has kind of basically been allowed to kind of find its way kind of generically, because Microsoft always kind of rests on the fact that they have Windows, the operating system, the server operating systems, and then most importantly, Microsoft Office. Those are all the cash cows. So SharePoint really, I think at this point, is starting to become a more mature product, and that is really because everything's moving to the cloud. But it shows you all the different versions of everything, and then they show you some of their, goals basically compared to people, well, actually what I'm trying to say here, their goals relative to the earlier versions. You can see that they're trying to get like a cohesive look. They're trying to push you to the cloud. They do want a real heavy social aspect.
It really means mobile friendly, is what I'm trying to say, but they weren't there yet, probably, when this book was going on.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, across devices, I mean, we say across devices because, really the primary computing platform for most people now, not for content creation, but for usage is phones, tablets, laptops, desktops. Who really buys desktops anymore? Gamers, you know, people that do heavy duty computing, you know, yeah, a lot of those. Um, so we are in a device-oriented world, and they're recognizing that. So they really have done a good job of about creating apps across all platforms to enable interactivity with SharePoint, so which I think is pretty helpful. All right. The other thing that I think is of significance here, and I'm trying to get to it here. Okay, so the book focuses on the classic experience. It's kind of where we're going to be working, folks. So they're going to show you um, the way to actually switch modes here. So in other words, they're going to want you to look at things a certain way relative to how we're working. So when I'm working in our environment that I have on the server, that's classic mode for SharePoint. What you're seeing here is the version that's what you're going to see on Office 365. So slightly, you know, and Stephanie, I know I see your face because you've been working with it already. Yeah, it has changed even since the printing of this book. Um, but once you get the feel of like where to look for things, I mean, they're generally in the same places, even if the aesthetics are slightly different, and the tools are all basically the same. All right. So this is what we are learning in this chapter, and granted, there's no real exercises here. I mean, really, what it's about is learning about what we're about to do. So when we convene next week, we're going to move into chapter 2, and at that point, there are practice files that you need to download and things that we will try to do. Now, I want to just really strongly reiterate that, remember, we have that Office 365 environment we can play with. So if you're finding this stuff's not working in our environment, go to Office 365 and try doing some of this stuff. Yeah, as soon as we can get in. And then the other thing is that if we find that stuff's not working, one of the paths that we're going to be on collectively is the fact that we're going to figure out how to make it work, and then the rich experience that is figuring out how to do something that powerful, which is really cool. All right, folks, that's it for tonight. And I know that you guys have some, you know, stuff that you can play with here, and basically what they're really asking you to do is explore. So if you want to play with these last couple of tasks, please do so. In fact, you know, these might not make a bad little assignment. Okay, you know, in fact, no, I'm just kind of deciding on the fly here. I think I'm going to take these pages here and assign them. Yeah, let's do that. So when we come, let's do this. Next time we come back, we're going to jump right into this and play with this and then move into chapter 2. All right? You get a chance to do that stuff preemptively. It's always appreciated because I think it makes for a richer experience. But otherwise, make sure that you get reading. And at this point, I'd try to get read up to at least through chapter 2, if not chapter 3, and experiment wherever you can. All right, folks. Thank you. We'll see you next time.